Do you think fame guarantees a happy ending? Today, we're looking at 5 British entertainment legends who packed theatres, dominated primetime television, and became some of the most recognizable faces in the country, the kind of stars a whole nation assumed were set for life. Every single one of them died in extreme poverty, not downsizing the house, not quietly retiring. We're talking embezzled life savings, bankruptcy courts, and one man collapsing dead in full stage costume with the taxman due in court the following week. And these aren't rumors. Every story here comes straight from biographies, court records, and press coverage from the time. Watch closely, because the further down this list we go, the more familiar the pattern starts to feel. The same warning signs, the same quiet collapse, story after story, decade after decade. Grab a tissue, because here are 5 British entertainment legends who died in extreme poverty. Hilda Baker. Hilda Baker was one of the most recognizable faces in British comedy, a sharp-tongued Lancashire powerhouse who had been performing since the age of 10, when she was already the main breadwinner in her family's touring act. She spent decades grinding through music halls before finally breaking through, first with her own BBC variety show in the mid-1950s, then with the sitcom Be Soon in 1963, and finally with the role that made her a household name, the decade-defining ITV sitcom Nearest and Dearest. She organized her own shows while still a teenager, and true national popularity finally arrived through an appearance on the BBC's The Good Old Days in 1955. With her signature malapropisms and her towering, silent sidekick Cynthia, Baker became a genuine national treasure, one of the most instantly recognizable comedians on British television. In 1978, at the age of 73, she even landed an unlikely novelty hit single, a cover of You're the One That I Want, recorded with fellow comic actor Arthur Mullard, which climbed to number 22 on the UK charts. She seemed indestructible, a woman who had clawed her way up from provincial stages to national stardom through sheer force of personality. But behind the fame, her finances were quietly falling apart. In the late 1960s, at the height of her success, Baker discovered that her own driver had embezzled roughly £2,500 from her, a substantial sum at the time, and only a small fraction of it, around £45, was ever recovered by the courts. It was the kind of betrayal that quietly ate away at the financial cushion a star of her stature should have been building for old age. Around the same time, her body began to betray her too. In her later years, cognitive decline set in, forcing her to use cue cards just to remember her lines during the final episodes of Nearest and Dearest. A leg fracture sustained on set effectively ended her career, and a bitter legal dispute with the production company followed. She was later diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. At the age of 76, with her money gone and her mind fading, Baker moved into a care facility in Epsom, Surrey. Her final television appearance had already come and gone by then, a quiet, little-watched arts documentary in 1978, a world away from the ratings she once commanded. On May 1, 1986, she died there, largely forgotten by the industry that had once adored her. Fewer than 10 people attended her funeral, a startling contrast for a woman whose career had spanned more than 60 years, from childhood music hall performances all the way through to primetime television stardom in her 50s and 60s. The tragic irony was unbearable. The woman who had once commanded some of the biggest audiences in British television history died alone, and practically penniless, in an institution most of her old fans never even knew she'd entered. Jimmy James. Jimmy James was a comedian's comedian, a music hall and television legend. His surreal sketch The Box, a bizarre, nonsensical routine about an imaginary object hidden inside an ordinary cardboard box, performed with his son and cousin as his stooges, left even fellow performers like Eric Morecambe in genuine awe of his instincts. His deadpan delivery and improvisational genius made him one of the most beloved and respected entertainers of his generation, a man who claimed to loathe scripts and rarely used one because he trusted his own timing more than any writer's page. Off stage, ironically, James was teetotal and never smoked, a striking contrast to the convincing, cigar-chomping drunk he played so memorably in his act. His son, James Casey, eventually became his scriptwriter and stooge, performing alongside his father's cousin, who worked under the stage name Eli Woods, in the surreal routines that made James a favorite among fellow comedians long before television audiences caught on. He earned enormous sums at the peak of his career, headlining seasons in Blackpool for years on end. However, James had a fatal flaw that no amount of talent could fix. He was a compulsive gambler, addicted to betting on horses and cards, and he was so careless with money that he never even opened a bank account in his life. During one summer season alone, as the story goes, he took to getting a haircut every single day purely because the local barber accepted racing bets, and on one occasion won £28,000, only to lose every penny of it again within days. His generosity made things worse. He gave money away constantly to friends, colleagues, and strangers, often forgetting to set anything aside for the tax collector at all. The consequences caught up with him again and again. He was declared bankrupt in 1939, again in 1955, and a third time in 1963, when he stood before the court and, completely deadpan, told the judge, "I presume I have now won the official receiver outright." He retired from the stage in 1964, just a year after that third and final bankruptcy hearing, his finances still in ruins after a lifetime of wins and losses that had never once been backed by so much as a savings account. Less than a year later, on August 4, 1965, Jimmy James suffered a heart attack and died of pulmonary congestion in Blackpool, the town where he'd topped the bill so many times. The comedian who had made an entire industry laugh for 5 decades and who never once owned a bank account, left this world with nothing saved, undone not by illness or scandal, but by his own generous, reckless heart. Frank Randall. Frank Randall, born Arthur Hughes in the small town of Aspel in 1901, was one of the biggest stars British variety ever produced, a wild, subversive Lancashire comic and contemporary of George Formby and Gracie Fields, whose raucous stage persona packed out theatres across the north of England for decades. He performed under a string of stage names throughout his career, including Arthur McAvoy and Arthur Twist, before settling on Randall. He became so associated with edgy, boundary-pushing material that his popularity, unlike his more polished contemporaries such as Formby, has never quite been matched by lasting mainstream fame or the kind of nostalgic TV specials that kept other stars of his era in the public eye, long after they'd stopped performing. At his peak in 1950, he was reportedly taking in £1,000 a week at the box office at Manchester's Hume Hippodrome, a staggering sum that made him one of the highest earners in British entertainment at the time. Crowds adored his anarchic energy and his willingness to say what other comedians wouldn't, even when it got him banned from certain theatres or arrested on obscenity charges more than once. That same defiant streak that built his fan base also made him difficult to manage, and as tastes in comedy began shifting in the post-war years, his refusal to soften his act cost him bookings just as his expenses and drinking were both climbing. Nothing about him looked breakable back then, a force of nature who could fill any hall in the country on his name alone. But behind the chaos on stage was a man drowning in real chaos off it. Randall was a heavy, lifelong drinker, and as the variety circuit itself began to decline through the 1950s, his career declined right along with it. Mounting debts and unpaid taxes closed in around him fast. By 1954, he reportedly owed the Inland Revenue £56,000, an almost unthinkable sum for the era, and in 1955 the tax authorities made him formally bankrupt. Stripped of the wealth he had spent decades building, and physically deteriorating from years of alcohol abuse, Randall's health collapsed alongside his finances. His very last starring film role had come in 1953, in It's a Grand Life, alongside a young Diana Dawes, a final glimpse of the box office star he'd once been before the tax bills and the bottle caught up with him for good. On July 7, 1957, Frank Randall died in Blackpool at the age of 56, from gastroenteritis, his body finally giving out under the weight of everything else that had already failed him. The man who once commanded £1,000 a week at the door died with almost nothing left to his name. Arthur Lucan. Born Arthur Towell in Lincolnshire in 1885, Arthur Lucan was, for nearly 40 years, one of the biggest stars in Britain, though most audiences never once saw his real face. He first developed the Old Mother Riley character almost by accident, stepping into the role of a pantomime dame in Dublin when the original performer fell ill, and the character stuck with him for the rest of his life. In drag as the cantankerous washerwoman Old Mother Riley, alongside his wife and stage partner Kitty McShane playing his daughter, Lucan became a genuine phenomenon. He headlined music halls and starred in a hugely profitable run of 17 films between 1937 and 1952, becoming a top 10 British film star in 1942. He built an entire empire on a single unforgettable character, a working-class heroine adored across the country. Decades later, a Greater London Council blue plaque was erected on his former home to honour him, a tribute he never lived to see, and one that stood in stark contrast to how he actually spent his final years. Off-stage, however, his marriage was a disaster, and it was slowly bankrupting him in every sense of the word. Kitty McShane's spending, her drinking, and their increasingly public, violent feuds drained his earnings for years, and by the early 1950s their partnership had collapsed entirely, though Lucan continued quietly supporting her financially even after they separated. As his fortune evaporated, the tax bills piled up relentlessly. By 1954, Lucan was deep in debt and facing formal bankruptcy proceedings. Still, he kept working, because he had no financial cushion left to fall back on, and no character, other than Mother Riley, left to sell, even making his final film, a horror comedy, opposite Bela Lugosi, without Kitty by his side at all. On May 17, 1954, while touring in a production called Old Mother Riley Goes to Paris, Lucan collapsed in the wings of the Tivoli Theatre in Hull, fully dressed in his Old Mother Riley costume, waiting for his cue to go on stage. He died backstage, in character, at the age of 68. He was due to appear in bankruptcy court just one single week later. The star who had made millions laugh for 4 decades as a fictional washerwoman literally died penniless, mid-tour, 1 week away from being declared officially broke in front of the entire country. His understudy would go on to carry the Old Mother Riley character for decades afterward, a strange kind of afterlife, for a role that had ultimately given its creator nothing but debt by the time he died. Terry Thomas. Born Thomas Terry Hoare Stevens in Finchley, North London in 1911, the son of a Smithfield meat market manager, Terry Thomas rose from a working-class background to become the quintessential English cad, instantly recognizable by the third of an inch gap between his front teeth, his cigarette holder, and his catchphrase, "You're an absolute shower." He served with the Entertainment's National Service Association during the Second World War, before working his way up through a string of Bolting Brothers comedies that made his caddish persona a national institution. He conquered British and Hollywood cinema alike, appearing alongside legends like Spencer Tracy, Buster Keaton, and Mickey Rooney in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, and later starring in the hit French comedy La Grande Vadrouille. Along the way, he earned a considerable fortune playing disreputable upper-class rogues that audiences couldn't help but love. For a time, he and his wife even lived comfortably in the Balearic Islands, having been introduced to the region by his close friend, actor Denholm Elliott, a lifestyle that made his eventual collapse into poverty back in England feel even more jarring to those who knew him. On screen, he was the very image of wealth and privilege, a man who appeared to have it all. But in 1971, everything changed in an instant. After falling ill while performing in a play in Sydney, Thomas was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a progressive condition that would slowly strip away the very physical comic timing that had made him famous. As the illness worsened through the 1970s, his career shrank alongside his body's control, and by 1980, his final film role was already behind him. What followed was a devastating freefall. Thomas spent the bulk of his considerable fortune chasing medical treatment for a disease with no cure. He and his wife were eventually forced to leave their home entirely, renting a small housing association flat in South London and relying on charity from the Actors Benevolent Fund just to survive. He was once quoted saying, grimly, "One doctor said I've got about 4 more years to live. God forbid, I shall probably blow my brains out first." His old friend, the actor Richard Briers, visited him during this period and later described him as barely recognizable, saying he was sitting there, motionless. He was just a mere shadow, a crippled, crushed shadow. It was really bloody awful. It wasn't until 1989, when actor Jack Douglas and writer Richard Hope Hawkins discovered the shocking scale of his poverty, that anything changed. A star-studded 5-hour benefit gala at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane, featuring 120 performers, topped by Phil Collins and chaired by Michael Caine, raised over £75,000, just enough to move Thomas out of his charity flat and into Busbridge Hall Nursing Home in Godalming, Surrey. He died there on January 8, 1990, at the age of 78, and at his funeral service, mourners played the theme from Those Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines, one of the roles that had made him a household name decades earlier. It was a bitterly fitting final act. The actor, who had spent a lifetime on screen playing wealthy and titled gentlemen, spent his own final years as a virtual pauper, saved from complete destitution only by the charity of the very industry he had once ruled. Fame might buy the mansion, but as we've seen, it doesn't always buy the ending. These 5 brilliant performers lit up British screens and stages for generations, earning fortunes that, on paper, should have carried them comfortably into old age. But illness, addiction, betrayal, and simple bad luck stripped that security away one by one, until some of the most famous faces in the country were relying on charity funds, care homes, and the goodwill of former colleagues just to survive their final years. It's a sobering reminder that the entertainment industry, then and now, has never been especially kind to the people who built it. Which one of these 5 tragic stories shocked you the most? Let us know down below. Hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the true stories behind Britain's best-loved entertainers. And remember, the show must go on, even when the money doesn't. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.